A judge in an employment tribunal in Peterborough has said that claiming not to be a feminist could be an act of discrimination. I quote the judge, who said it would appear that a feminist is simply about all genders having equal rights and opportunities as men. The judge confessed the tribunal was perplexed by the defendant's non-feminist views and suggested such opinions would be in breach of equality laws. I'm as perplexed as the judge by his statement that feminism relates to all genders, implying more than two. I thought feminism was about women, not the transgender ideology. But discrimination must require action rather than a lack of belief. As long as others are treated equally under the law, is there one definition of feminism that must be believed? This seems an extraordinary intrusion into personal belief, as opposed to viewing discrimination as an active decision. Well, with me now is my panel, associate commentator at The Telegraph, Mutaz Ahmed, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, is it compulsory, basically, to agree with you? Now, you may think it should be, but is that a sensible way for the law to go?
Isn't that why you have me here as your token feminist? So that you aren't entirely shut down by a tribunal, the establishment that is GB News. No, I looked up the definition of feminism for you, Jake, because I thought you might need some help in this area. It is the advocacy of women's rights, people like me, on the basis of the equality of the sexes. So that is baked into law, last updated, as we discovered.
Well, hold on. Baked into law, the equality, and yes. I'm all in favour of that. But advocacy, to say that it is compulsory to advocate something is very different from saying that something is the law of the land.
It's good to see your usual pedantry self.
Yeah, that's what you would expect. It's what my viewers and listeners expect too.
Indeed. It's important to say that this manager, he was an environmental agency manager, therefore he had a level of agency within his agency. They were contesting his maintenance of a non-feminist view. They suggested that was discriminatory, i.e., as a manager, by maintaining non-feminist views, that impacts on your ability.
In a heated debate, Jacob Rees-Mogg confronted a feminist panelist over a controversial tribunal ruling in Peterborough.
But he was maintaining his non-feminist stance, which is counter to equality. It runs counter to equality.
Not if you didn't do anything about it. Mutaz.
Feminism is not about equality anymore. It's about crushing the patriarchy. It's about women gaining the upper hand over men. That's not equal.
You're another beleaguered male.
I'm not a feminist. You can believe in equality, right? But you don't have to be a feminist to believe it. And if this man is saying he's not a feminist, he might well be saying, I don't believe in crushing the patriarchy. I don't believe in creating an environment that's negative for men.
I understand that you're actually half my age and you perhaps haven't been around quite long enough to understand what feminism literally means in its legal defined context. What's happened since you grew up is that the culture wars have taken words like feminism and they've injected them with all kinds of potency, which actually are deeply unhelpful to the cause of equality and the cause of women.
If I don't identify with that word then, which has been injected with all of this politics, am I being discriminatory? If I say in the workplace that I don't believe in DEI, am I saying that I don't believe in racial equality? Of course I'm not. I'm saying that I don't believe in the politics of DEI. I don't believe in the politics of feminism. How is that discriminatory?
Well, I think what we need to do is divorce the definition of feminism from the way in which you clearly see some individuals as using it as a tool to whip the likes of you with and your rights with. I will go back to read the Oxford Dictionary definition of feminism.
The judge had suggested that not identifying as a feminist could constitute discrimination, implying feminism includes support for all gender identities.
She gets up and she says, Patrick, this is very hard for me to say this. And let me tell you why it's very hard. I said, what's that? She says, ever since in high school, I wanted to prove to men that I can beat them. So when I graduated high school and college, I opened up my salon. We do very well. I've made millions of dollars. My people and my work that work at the salon, they do very well for themselves. I drive a nice car, I have a nice house, I have money, I have millions. I don't worry about any of that stuff. You know what decision I made last night? I said, what's that? She says, I want a husband. I no longer want to compete with men. I need them. And I'm like, what? She's saying this in front of 2,000 people with her sister sitting right next to her.
Wow.
And now she's getting emotional. How many 65-year-old women do we have to hear saying that I marched with the feminist movement and I bought into the fact that men are the enemy? I've never been married. I'm alone and I'm miserable and I...
Modern feminism's sad truth is revealed when a successful woman admits she once aimed to outdo men but now longs for a husband. Despite her wealth and achievement, she feels unfulfilled and regrets her past belief that men were the enemy, realising too late that she's alone and unhappy.
Of the equality of the sexes.
Very interestingly, when I looked it up in the Oxford Dictionary, it says you should pronounce it feminism, which seems to have gone out of fashion. And I think that's Mutaz's...
Well, that was before even I was born.
But I think that's Mutaz's point, that words evolve, and actually what you're saying about a dictionary definition is all perfectly fair and true, but Mutaz's point is absolutely spot on. It has become a political advocacy of something. I'm all in favour, strongly in favour, of equality before the law. I think it is the most fundamental principle of British law. But that doesn't mean that I believe that there is equality of all genders. I don't actually think there are more than two genders anyway. And this judge is on about there being a whole slew of genders. That's very odd, isn't it?
This judge is... I didn't catch that.
He said that his definition of feminism, or as we're all now going to pronounce it, feminism, is that it relates to all genders. Now, once you say all genders, all implies more than two. It's only both genders, isn't it? We would say... I mean, I'm delighted we're having a discussion about the correct use of English, but it's both genders. Now, actually, you're a feminist. How many genders do you believe in?
Well, in the eyes of the law, the protected characteristics of different individuals equates to more than just two sexes. It includes more than two genders. So I would say I'm separating sex from gender, and I would say that while I recognise two sexes, there may be more people identifying with more than two genders.
Are feminists protected or endangered by a man in a frock going into ladies' loos? I've silenced Tessa. That's the first time that's ever happened. Mutaz.
What are the other genders? What are they?
Well, I'm not...
Rees-Mogg questioned this view, arguing that feminism should focus on women's rights, not expanding to include multiple genders.
For how to handle it, rather than cover them in cotton wool. Well, I'm joined now by broadcaster and former Brexit MEP, Alex Phillips, Talk TV contributor and lawyer, Paula Rowan-Adrian, and political journalist, Ava Santina. All right, Alex, I brought up 4 kids. I'm not perfect by any means. I mean, nearly perfect as a father, probably. But this sanitising of everything, this overprotection, this wrapping in cotton wool, this nobody can lose, nobody can be called any funny names in cartoons, blah, blah, blah. It's exhausting. And B, all it seems to be doing is increasing the amount of anxiety in kids. All the figures show the situation's getting worse, not better. I would argue this strategy hasn't worked. It's had the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's utter madness. I mean, what we seem to be doing as a society now is making our kids into little hypochondriacs, to worry about everything, to police their own language at the time they should be learning how to develop their communication skills, to see everything through the prism of race, to see everything through the prism of gender. And then at the same time, the things perhaps we should protect them from, adult fetish, pornography, we're foisting upon them at an alarming rate. And I don't understand what children are supposed to be anymore. Are they supposed to engage with this adult world of critical race theory and extreme adult content?
100 genders.
There is no more innocence. Safeguarding has gone out the window.
All right, Paula, we've discussed a lot of these issues, all right? And I get that some kids are anxious. I've met quite a few kids who have a lot of anxiety problems. I think a lot of it is social media driven. I think a lot of it is dopamine driven, that they're exposed through social media to a constant barrage of imagery from wars and other things, which we simply would never have seen when I was a kid. So I think that cannot be overlooked, this constant sensory overload impacting negatively. And yet all the statistics will show young people, if they're calmly explained, There's never been a better time to be.
Rees-Mogg claims that this form of censorship creates an unrealistic and sanitized view of the world, ultimately increasing children's anxiety. Instead, Morgan believes children should be prepared for real-world challenges rather than sheltered from every potential offence.
Know that there are those with protected characteristics, transsexuals, who have a different idea of their own gendered identity. And who am I to quibble with that? I really think what concerns me greatly is that the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's more likely to be found in the sort of golf house or the gentleman's drinking club than he ever is campaigning for equality and women's rights and worrying about our safety, suddenly gets very hot under the collar if a man wears a woman's frock and says he's a woman and then goes into a female space. In any other context, do you ever get worried about female safety?
No, this is something that women are concerned about.
Some women, a few women. The only reason we're hearing so much about this is because men like you have jumped on their bandwagon.
No, we're hearing so much about it because of feminists, ironically. It's people like J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a rabbit hole that I wish feminism, which has got far greater causes to fight, like equality, justice, economic justice for women.
Tessa, having been momentarily silenced, is now making up for it.
He challenged the notion that failing to advocate for feminism equates to discrimination, asserting that personal beliefs should not interfere with equality under the law. The discussion highlighted tensions between traditional definitions of feminism and evolving societal views on gender.
Amongst our youth, kids' mental health is in crisis, we're told. Anxiety and depression rampant among children. There's even a child anxiety epidemic right here in the UK, apparently. It all sounds very alarming. It's also a bit confusing because, generally speaking, the world is getting more prosperous, less poor, safer. There are fewer wars. People are living longer and healthier. It should be that young people feel quite happy, actually. Now we've come through the pandemic, they should be, but they're not. And social media probably has a lot to do with that. An entire digital world of vipers exists where self-esteem can be measured directly in likes. Even I would worry about that if I wasn't, so well liked. But perhaps there's a bigger problem here, and it's us. We ghastly adults who at some point decided we should teach children to be mortally offended by everyone and utterly terrified of everything, and that they could win at everything and never lose. Fresh from ransacking Roald Dahl's legendary children's stories, so-called sensitivity readers, God, that phrase just fills my skin with horror. Doesn't it yours? They make you just literally sensitivity readers. I've now said about cancelling, you guessed it, this.
Come on, Plum, throw the ball! I've got it! Oh, Spotty, what are you doing in my pea soup?
I used to love the Bass Street Kids and the Beano. Those mischievous little rogues in Britain's best-loved comic book. They were always problematic, it's why I like them. I like them being problematic. They've entertained children for 67 years without complaint. You know what? Kids can be problematic. I've had 4 of them. The consultants from Inclusive Minds, the very same people who censored Roald Dahl's books, have quietly decided there needs to be some changes. Of course they do. The Beano now takes professional advice from its committee of Fun Police, which has helped to rebrand its characters and vet its back catalogue. Spotted.
In his show, Rees-Mogg Uncensored, Rees-Mogg criticises the trend of censoring children's books for sensitivity.
Is now known as Scotty. He's still got spots, you just can't say it. And Fatty, who was called Fatty because he's a fatty, is now known as Freddie, even though he's still fat. We just can't call him that. The kids have been joined by 5 new pupils, including Harsha, Mihira and Mandira, in order to be more inclusive. Mandira is featured in storylines about mental health to apparently highlight the anxieties facing children. Perhaps they should do one about Mandira being warned that her friend Fatty is offensive. This is from the same set of geniuses who changed cloud men to cloud people in James and the Giant Peach and decided that black tractors in Fantastic Mr. Fox could not be described as black because it was potentially racist to other tractors, presumably. Now, there are 2 points here. The first is about censorship. If we continue to rewrite every work of fiction based on today's sensibilities, you're going to have to keep doing it every 10 years until you're left with a sanitized slab of nonsense that bears zero resemblance to the original. The context of when something was written is part of what makes it informative and interesting. The second point is this. We heard a hell of a lot less about child anxiety when Fatty and Spotty were on the loose, because they were considered to be funny then. It was a joke. It's a cartoon. If we genuinely want our kids to feel happier and less anxious, maybe we should stop teaching them constantly that the entire world is out to get them. Show them how to be less offended by absolutely everything. Stop allowing them to all get a prize in everything they compete in at school, so they all think that they're winners when sometimes they're not. Because none of that is a proper preparation for the real world. The one that in Barbie Land is such a shock to Margot Robbie when she gets to it. The real
Piers Morgan argues that while the world has generally improved, youth mental health is deteriorating, partly due to overprotective approaches.
About the suicide rate amongst children, about how their mental health is suffering, about how children are being bullied, both personally and online in the social world, social media world. And so when we look at the Beano, what surprised me about this story is that we weren't applauding what the Beano were doing. We weren't, saying, we weren't championing what they were doing, which is to stop children from calling each other names, because that's not appropriate.
Well, you think it's going to stop because the Beano stops using names? I mean, come on.
But, well, yes, I do actually, because it's teaching children that it's not appropriate. And you call somebody by their name, which is Frank, John, Paula or Alex. You don't call them Spotty, you don't call them Darky, you don't call them Fatty, you call them by their name. And so what you are doing but what the Beano is doing is acknowledging that it's anachronistic in its style and that it shouldn't be, that it should be taking responsibility for providing a positive message for children. Stop being mean, children.
Yeah, but the trouble is life is tough, Ava. Life is very mean. I always remind people of the Rocky Balboa speech to his son, who's a spoiled, entitled brat in the 6th movie. And eventually Rocky loses it with him in the street and says, look, life is hard. It will beat you down, right? And the challenge of succeeding in life is how many times you can get back up and keep moving forward. It's not how hard you can punch. It's about how hard you can get punched and keep going. We know this. And my argument is I think we're just not preparing kids properly for the real world. And trying to create this kind of Barbie-style utopia where no one's mean, no one uses mean words, all that kind of thing, means you basically have to airbrush now every work of literature going back in history, because it was all full of mean stuff.
No, I think you're
it was.
Come on.
From Roald Dahl to the Beano, they're all getting censored.
Right.
I don't get it. I don't get any of it works.
I think it's quite obvious that parents probably don't want to sit down in 2023 and read a bedtime story to their child about, Fatty and Spotty. I think it's probably marketing.
I do.
Morgan is particularly outraged by changes to beloved characters in children's literature, such as renaming Spotty to Scotty and Fatty to Freddie.
I want to play you both a clip. Your dad's had a lot of feuds with people. Some he starts, some he doesn't, some he just gets picked on for the sake of it. There's a lot of feminists who he winds up very successfully, I would say, because they're very easy to wind up. One of them is Caitlin Moran, who's currently in America, and she's using your dad a lot, ranting away about him. And here's one clip of her talking about your dad.
He shared a piece to his 10 million followers in which I think I do a pretty good demolishment job of his entire career and oeuvre. The advice that he gives is either the kind of stuff your mum would say for free, like make your bed, pet a cat in the street, or mad stuff about lobsters. I didn't even go to school, let alone university. And I was halfway through his book going, I'm fairly sure I can demolish a great deal of the logic in this book. This guy is not the smartest guy in the world. He's just a man in a waistcoat who sounds, to be honest, a bit like Kermit from The Muppet Show.
Kermit from The Muppet Show. Your thoughts?
Well, that's true. I do sound a lot like Kermit from The Muppet Show. So that was the one thing she said that was accurate.
That's not even her joke, though.
No, it's
That's
not.
not clever if you steal it from somebody else.
No, and it's an old joke. But it was a good one when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think of her?
Sounds like she'd be fun at a party. Or as your mother. Yeah.
Or as your
Have
mother.
that as your mother, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Michaela,
I bet her
do you think,
kids
Michaela,
didn't
that
make
people
their
like
bed.
Michaela, do you think people like Caitlin Moran, do they just basically misunderstand what your dad really is about?
I don't even think they're capable of understanding what he's about. There's too much arrogance there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be that arrogant and assume you know everything and then read something and learn, or read anything and learn. Right?
That's why you don't cast pearls before swine, dear.
You know, Jordan, my sons, as I think I've told you before, are all big fans of yours. And they just said to me, they got one question, which, what advice do you give for children who are the children of controversial public figures?
Well, you know, Michaela has leapt out and taken the opportunities that came along with that.
Dr. Jordan Peterson responds to feminist Caitlin Moran's criticism, dismissing her claim that he's just a man in a waistcoat and likening her remarks to an outdated joke.
My son Julian is a more private person, and he's chosen to erect barriers around his family and not to face the public as much, although he has played his music at my lectures and he works with me. I think, you know, each person has to find their own way. There are great advantages to having a tremendous amount of attention devoted to you and having people offer opportunities, but each person, depending on their own temperamental proclivities, has to figure out how to manage that themselves. And it's complex, but it can work. I mean, Julian, Tammy, and Michaela have all reacted to that in their own way. It took Tammy a good while, like the rest of us, to figure out what her place was, so to speak, but she's really managed that. And Tammy is out in public much more than I would have thought she would have been. You know, if I would have been able to see into the future 10 years ago, she's become quite an accomplished public speaker, for example, and she certainly didn't think that was in her cards or in the stars. But things come at you and you surf the wave and you're happy for the opportunity. And Julian and Michaela and Tammy have all adapted in their various ways, and I think at the moment that's working like a charm.
And Michaela,
So,
if I asked you,
hooray.
Michaela, obviously the family's gone through this extraordinary 6-7 years or more now, involving some extraordinary challenges for you all personally, which would have happened anyway, or perhaps not actually in your dad's case, but certainly for you and your mum. But you've come out and you've got fabulously wealthier as a family, I guess, than before this started, fabulously more famous than before it started. But if I had the power to transport you back to anonymity, without the fame, without the extra money and all the rest of it, would you take that deal, or would you be actually quite happy where you've all washed up now?
Oh, there's no way I would take that deal, even with everything we went through. I was talking to my husband the other day about why I'm interested in making money versus why he is, and he said he always liked expensive things, basically. And I said, I'm like decked out right now, but I also didn't mind buying things from thrift shops and decorating my room that way. I didn't want to feel vulnerable anymore from not having enough money. And so
Peterson argues that critics like Moran misunderstand his work due to their arrogance.